critical thinking is what keeps us unique as humans. And if we lose that, then using that AI starts to be our downfall, right? So even though things can process faster and maybe it gives a better result than the human can, go through data significantly faster, especially when you think about cloud computing, than we could just as humans traditionally. But we have to be able to critically think and do that fact check, and maintaining that technical prowess as the engineering community. I think that's part of our both biggest challenge and biggest opportunity.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Keep Moving Forward, the podcast from X Team for tech professionals who are passionate about growth, leadership, and innovation. I'm your host, Caleb Brown, and in each episode, we explore candid conversations with the tech industry's brightest minds, seasoned leaders, forward-thinking engineers, and visionary experts. Today, I'm joined by Amanda Stapleton. At the time of our conversation, Amanda was VP of Technical Services at Belkin Engineering, and she has since moved into the new, exciting role of Systems Engineering Director of Mission Systems at Northrop Grumman. And her history is just as exciting. From a pivotal moment at a STEM camp before 8th grade to leading cutting-edge aerospace programs, Amanda's career has taken her across countries, industries, and evolving leadership challenges. She brings a rare combination of deep technical expertise and a people-first leadership approach. In this episode, Amanda shares her insights on leading global engineering teams, navigating the cultural shifts that come with a digital transformation, and fostering innovation in a field where safety standards leave no room for error. We also talk about her leadership evolution, the importance of mentorship, and her perspective on the future of engineering in a world shaped by AI and digital engineering. If you're curious about how to lead through complexity, build trust across borders, and help the next generation thrive in engineering, this conversation is full of wisdom and inspiration. Let's get into it. Amanda, super happy to be able to chat with you. Was lucky enough to kind of go through your whole background as far as I could sort of research, and really cool, interesting stuff there. A great background. I'm excited to really jump into it. But what I wanted to do, just to kick things off here, I believe it was on our prep call, you had mentioned attending GEMS camp, that's Girls in Engineering, Math, and Science, before the 8th grade, and that kind of, totally changed your career trajectory. And I just wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about that sort of pivotal moment and what sparked that passion for engineering back then.
Sure. No, yeah. For me, that was that decision point. Previously, I thought I was going to be an architect, and that was the route I was going. But I'd always been passionate about aerospace. Amelia Earhart actually was someone that I saw as a bit of an idol, right? The trail that she blazed within aviation for women. And so when I attended that camp and got exposed to the various different types of engineering and avenues that not just a female engineer, but engineers in general could take and go after, I thought, right, okay, I'm hooked. This is what I want to do. I like tinkering with things and figuring out how things work. And it was that exposure within that camp that allowed me to recognize, oh, that's what engineers do. They get to tinker with things and create new things and design things and help make the world a better place. And, when you phrase it that way, when you see it that perspective, who wouldn't want to do that, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's, so like I said, looking back on your kind of your career in general, it looks like you kind of started sort of early experience at Rolls-Royce. And I'm really excited to hear how that kind of shaped your approach to engineering and leadership early on. And also, it truly might be a good time actually to just hear a little bit about actually your full career trajectory, your path, how you got to where you are, and then start with that experience at Rolls-Royce, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start it where from an engineering perspective, it all started, I'll say formally from a career perspective. I went to Rose-Hulman. So it's a engineering school in Terre Haute, Indiana. So actually this year we turned 150 years old, the university did. And having females in that organization is still fairly new. I was actually on campus when we celebrated 10 years of females being on campus. So when you think about a university that's now 150 years old, it's still kind of in its infancy from having a co-ed campus. And so that to me really prepared me for an engineering career because, as most of the folks probably recognize, females in engineering is a minority, right? We're not as evenly represented in that particular career field. And so I started into Rolls-Royce and was really even more so going into a domain that, especially at the time, was not as female focused. And so that opportunity not only honed in on my systems engineering thought process and how I approach problems and think about things, but started to really focus my trajectory on customer facing. How do you communicate? How do you lead individuals if you don't have that direct ownership, if you will, of their career? And so it's a lot of continuous learning and exposure. And then came back from that opportunity and transitioned to what at the time was still Rockwell Collins. Now they're Collins Aerospace. And with that role, it was similar, leveraging my technical engineering background, but in a leading capacity. So helped us to certify a FADEC, so one of those engine control units, and get that team transitioned to engineering production and then eventually full rate production. So when you think about designing these boxes, you can't just design it. You have to be able to build it and manufacture it so that it can be used by the end user. And so I actually helped transition all of those products from where we were in Northern Virginia to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So where at the time Rockwell Collins was headquartered. And so it's, again, everything is about communication and how do you work well with others and lead and recognize you're always learning from everyone, right? Everyone has something that we can learn from them. So continued my career at Collins for a little while longer and then got the opportunity with my current employer, which is Balkan Engineering. And with that, again, it's the same concept. It's working with people that I'd worked with early in my career, such as Rolls-Royce, and understanding their needs and how can we support them. And so going through that cycle, if you will, it's, how can we operate more efficiently as humans first and then work through the business details, which is more or less where I'm at today.
That absolutely makes sense. And like I said, I was really excited to have this conversation just because the industry, the domain is so fascinating, but also, like I said, you have such an interesting, kind of career and background in it. You had mentioned briefly in that about being in, I believe you said Europe, and I wanted to focus a little bit on, your career has taken you across multiple countries, I believe. And so I'm interested to know what sort of, motivated those international moves, but then furthermore, what the impact that experience had and how that changed, your leadership style.
Yeah, no, I love that question. And those that are around me a lot know I love to talk about that opportunity because it's something I encourage everyone to go for because exactly as you've said, it does change you as a person. It gives you more awareness. And for me in particular, I actually was an intern with Rolls-Royce. So I had already kind of decided in my mind that because Rolls-Royce is headquartered out of England, that I wanted to work out of England, right? I was going to start with Rolls-Royce after school. I wanted to be there so much so that my roommates and I, after college, we went on a trip before we started our big girl jobs. And we went over to the UK. And I told them, I said, we need to stop at the train station in Derby because we were just passing through because Derby is where Rolls-Royce is located out of. And I said, we need to stop because I'm going to be here. I'm going to work here one day. And they both thought I was, a little crazy, right? And so we did, and we saw it, and we had lunch in a pub right there by the train station. And, 3-4 years later, I'm there in Derby. So for me, it was something that I knew I wanted that exposure and that opportunity to have my eyes opened. And that's why I think it's important in some capacity to get outside of your comfort zone because, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but there's a quote that references staying in your comfort zone isn't where growth happens. Growth happens once you go past your comfort zone. So for me, that's a little bit of a kind of life mantra, if you will, is that I'm always if I'm comfortable, then I'm not growing.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, and so X Team where I work, we're a remote first company and, have engineers and employees all over the globe. And so there is some traveling involved, but also it's just nice to have coworkers that have these different experiences and you get to learn that, you become close with them, work with them often. And so, yeah, I definitely knew that you had, some positive thoughts about that and wanted to bring that up. So I was also wondering if you could share kind of perhaps a challenging moment in your career transition from, individual contributor to leader and how you navigate that. And I'm asked that question because, I know there's a lot of folks at home, even if they're, a software engineer or something like that, are in that position. They're an individual contributor kind of looking for those next steps. So yeah, I wonder if you could share a little bit of your experience there. And like I said, perhaps even a challenging moment of going from one to the other.
Sure. Yeah. So actually, when I joined my current company, I came in as a people manager. So call it hire fire responsibility. And that was the first time I'd ever had that. So all of my other leadership roles were just that. I was leading and I was influencing. And so I was very focused on building relationships, some even towards friendships and how do we work together as a unit. And I was very unsure of myself on how's this going to work. Now I'm the boss, right? If there's a disciplinary problem, I'm the one that needs to address it, as opposed to previously I could just highlight there's an opportunity for improvement and take it to the person's manager. Now that's me. And it took a lot of focus and actually some training to understand that relationship with the employee does need to be a little bit different, right? It's not just a friendship. In order to truly do that individual to the best of their career, you need to be willing and able to give them that constructive feedback.
Yeah, that's very good advice. And I wanted to switch a little bit to kind of digital engineering leadership, if you will. And I'm interested in how you're approaching kind of implementing of these digital engineering practices in what I imagine is a traditional aerospace environment.
Yeah. So within digital engineering, especially within aerospace and even more so on the defense side of aerospace, it's an evolving domain, especially if you think about model-based systems engineering. That's a newer practice using those models. Specifically with the DoD, they have rolled down mandates that we're supposed to use Cameo, right? So there's these specifics that organizations are now having to be compliant with. And it's a new style of working. It's a new way to think about documenting your system and how do you move forward. And now how do you truly get the value of that digital space and have the connectivity between your systems engineer writing those requirements and disseminating them into your designers, who then are disseminating them into the manufacturing domain and having to work through the build processes. And then you're now fielded and you're getting information back from the field. And how is that truly connected? And to do that effectively, it takes a team. That isn't a singular person saying, we're going to go forward with digital engineering. It has to be an organization that is bought into it. Because as soon as you have one link in that chain that says, no, this isn't what we want, or this isn't the best fit, either through lack of knowledge about what the value is for them, or it's just not something that organization is ready for, it starts to crumble, right? And so it's got to be thought of as a team initiative, and a team initiative where you're bringing people in to understand how this works and listen to the experts, right? The people that have done it, quote, the old way. They are going to have lessons learned and value to provide as you look at implementing a new process for how to engineer the next generation of fighter jets, for example.
100%. That's really interesting of, learning from the old ways, but still being able to innovate and move forward, and learning from that is very fascinating. What are some of the biggest challenges in, reducing development cycles while also maintaining those safety standards that we touched on?
So with aerospace, as I think people would hope, it's slow to change, right? Once we have something that is established and we're confident is safe, it's been proven, we shy away from change, right? Because change is uncertainty, and uncertainty normally leads to risk. And so with those, it's understanding, what do those certification cycles look like? What do the tool certifications look like, so that we can shorten those design cycle times without reducing any level of safety or any level of confidence in the product that's being put out the door. And that's mostly the space that the industry is sitting in, is understanding the tools, understanding how can we shorten test cycle times, leveraging the models, or in often instances, it's that digital twin. How can we use the data we have in front of us, recognizing that's based on the metal that's been cut and what the actual product will be, so that we can create a more efficient, faster delivery of the product while maintaining at or above safety requirements. And that's where the industry is trying to figure out, what's the best practice? How does this look? How do we do this efficiently? And there's a lot of, as you can imagine, a lot of conversation. No one's really gone the whole way through the cycle and done it yet. So I think that's where everyone is kind of sitting, waiting for that first adopter so everybody else can kind of see, okay, what's the lessons learned? What do we need to do then?
Yeah. Well, so how do you kind of manage, the cultural shift that's required when implementing those new digital engineering processes? Because, as you said, it is probably good and that industry has very strong standards and doesn't move too fast, but there is innovation, there is things moving forward. And so there's a cultural shift there. I'm interested how you manage that.
A lot of it is based on communication, right? People often fear things they don't understand. So the first step is giving them access to the education, having sessions to help them understand what that really means, right? They can understand the word digital, they can understand engineering or model-based, those sorts of individual words. What does that really mean? And helping them with that knowledge base. And then we've also found it's better to not go after everything, right? Don't try and boil the ocean. Identify what is a small project that we could do first, start to demonstrate, allow people to ask questions, potentially fail, but fail quickly in a small, less safety critical environment, and then grow from there. Because if you just look out and you say, right, I want to go after my entire product line and we're going to switch everything over in the next 12 months, that's quite a large goal, and that is most likely going to have some stumbling along the way. Start small in a controlled environment, demonstrate it works, allow people to ask their questions, and then build upon that.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to talk a little bit, kind of going back as we were talking about travel and things like that in culture. How does leading teams across different countries and therefore cultures sort of impact, your communication approach overall?
That's a great question. That's actually something I'm always learning, depending on which individuals, their backgrounds, their cultures that I'm working with. What I've found through some missteps and stumbles along the way is don't be afraid to ask, right? Allowing us to sit in assumption space versus directly asking the person, say, hey, I don't want to be rude to you. Help me better understand what is accepted for you, so that when I hear yes, for example, and the other individual, those were the letters that were said, that was the word that was said, but that's not, they don't interpret yes the same way I interpret yes, for example, can cause a lot of friction within a project. We think we're going fine, and then the team over here says, well, no, actually we aren't, right? And it can create that conflict that if we just address what's our best style of working, how do we communicate, what do these different interactions mean? And sometimes it helps to go outside of the team and ask someone else who's perhaps interacted with that culture, that team, that environment, say, hey, what did you experience? What are some lessons learned? What can I take into it? Because if we walk into something and just sit in our ignorance versus wanting to dispel that and ask those good questions, we're often going to stub our toe a little bit.
100%. As I said, I work with folks from all over the world, and it's been so helpful to have resources like that, bosses, colleagues that have worked in those environments and with those folks before, and just kind of, being able to tap them on the shoulder and say, this is sort of my approach. I'm going to go into it with, what do you think? Knowing your experience, that's been incredibly helpful for me. And I want to stay on that topic again, because I find this very fascinating. What unique challenges did you face when moving your family overseas for work? It's a big thing. I agree that people should do it if they can. It's a big thing. How did you overcome those challenges?
I think so my family and I, we've had the opportunity to move quite a few times over the years. And I've told this especially to individuals that are just coming out of college and are entertaining potentially going for an overseas role, is find something where you can connect with people. So for my family in particular, it's ultimate frisbee. So my husband and I both used to play. So wherever we're moving, we look for where's the local club? Where do they play pickup on a Sunday afternoon? Where is this club play? Where can we go to a tournament and watch other folks and find our tribe, find people that we can instantly connect with? No matter what their other background is, we know, right, ultimate frisbee, that's our group. So the first time we moved over to the UK, that's exactly what we did. We ended up actually living in Nottingham, even though I was working in Derby, because Nottingham had, two reasons. One, they had the most curry houses per square mile. And two, they had a strong ultimate frisbee scene. And so we ended up playing for the team there. We'd do pickup, that sort of thing. And through those friendships, through that common bond, that linkage, we were able to expand our network and get information about schools and get information about where we should go on holiday and what sorts of airlines to use and which ones maybe to avoid when looking at low cost, right? So all of those things that you don't necessarily glean from just reading a book or looking a place up online. Relationships to me were the key to us being successful. And through identifying individuals through that common bond, I mean, it's friends we have today. Actually, two of the friends, this is now years ago, but for my husband's 30th birthday, I flew them in as a surprise, right? It's effectively family, right? It's family we chose. So for us, that was how we always were able to go through those changes in environment.
I love that. Yeah, finding something, familiar from home in somewhere new is always a comforting feeling. And that makes a ton of sense. And helps. Something like Ultimate Frisbee is a really good example of that, right? It's active. There's a community. That makes a lot of sense. How do you, and my apologies, because this relates probably more to two questions ago, but I do want to ask you, and we do want to drill in a little bit more. Interested in how you maintain consistency in engineering practices across multiple teams that are international teams, and so respecting that local work cultures and things like that. I know we touched on that, but I did want to drill in a little bit more.
Yeah. So for a lot of our teams that cross multiple cultures or countries, for those to be effective, at least in my experience, you need to have a local technical lead and then an overall technical lead, right? Because your local technical lead is going to not only have the face-to-face interactions, we'll table remote work for a moment, but to have those face-to-face interactions with the other team members, they know them a little bit better, right? And they obviously are also aware of the culture for that particular area. But then when you have that overall technical focal, that's where you start to get that consistency. So even though there's nuances to each individual location or setting, it does allow for consistency on the total deliverable, the work product that goes out the door. And those need to be, at least in my experience, those need to be kept as a cadence, right? So those team members need to be meeting, if not daily, at least weekly, so that they are reviewing those things, ability to ask questions and understand this is a gold standard output. What does it look like coming out of this domain, for example?
Interested in how you kind of ensure remote team members feel as included and as valued as in-office staff. And obviously that's something that was pre-pandemic with, having kind of an HQ and then distributed teams. But I'm interested, it's a little bit of a spin on what we were talking about with just kind of purely remote. I'm just interested in how you bring in those folks in a more work-focused way. Obviously doing those things outside the office, very helpful, but curious your approach there.
Yeah, so that's actually something that I started to hone through the pandemic situation because it was a little bit forced upon us, right? But I've come across a cadence that seems to work not only for myself, but for my team members and more broadly, the team, is that every other week I'll have a team meeting. And so that team is my direct reports. And so, for folks that don't have direct reports, we might have to modify that model, but every other week is everyone in the team. And then on the off week is when I hold one-on-ones with everyone. And so that way, not only do you get time with the team, understand and know what they're working on, but you get your dedicated personal time. And then once a month, I do, short of a better phrase, a State of the Union. So it's a more broad team, not just my direct reports, but all of those that have an interest in, in my instance, I run system software. So I have all of the leaders for system software attend. And I give them updates on how we're doing from a business perspective, how we're doing from a new customer perspective, and allow them an opportunity to ask questions. And then a little bit of a look ahead. These are some of the cool projects that are coming, or this is something that as a team, we're going to work on next year. It's going to be in our 2025 strategy, for example, and allow that so that they feel that they are part of the team, even if they're not across the hall from me every day.
How do you foster that culture of innovation? We talked about it a little bit, but while maintaining those kind of very strict safety standards in aerospace. I'm just trying to understand how you kind of balance, making sure everything is strict and according to safety protocols, but also, a true culture of innovation moving forward, thinking how we can do this differently.
No, I love that question. And quite honestly, that's a question that as an organization, and I anticipate many organizations, we've asked ourselves the past several years is how do we, especially in a remote working world, how do we continue to promote innovation so that the next big idea is being pushed and these engineers, these individuals are thinking about those things. And so we actually have what we call an innovation lab. So it's both a physical and a digital environment that our engineers can put forward suggestions or ideas of things that they think would be, a cool idea or something that could help us be more efficient or help the customer be more efficient or a better way of doing a particular design. And we have I guess you could call it a board, people who evaluate those ideas. And then funding and time is allocated to those engineers to go into the lab, either physically or digitally. We operate within an AWS environment. So allow them to deliver kind of a prototype, if you will, and test out their idea and bring on board how could this actually work in a sandbox environment, right? In a non-safety critical, non-customer environment, trial it out so that then we can say, right, is this ready for prime time, right? So it gives them a space. It's a little bit of competition, right? Because not everyone gets access to that, right? We can't have all of our engineers in the space at the same time. So there's some level of that competition, but it also has that reward of, if you're able to take your prototype to a certain spot, then you can move it forward and present it to the customer and hopefully implement it, right? Coaching it through that formal set of wickets within the aerospace domain.
That's so cool. For one, that the Innovation Lab exists. I love that. Sounds like it would be very fun to work at the Innovation Lab. That is, like I said, why I was so excited to do this, because my background's in software development. I'm typically talking to other software developers and I understand the space pretty well, I would say. And so this was one that was a little bit different for me, a little newer for me. So it's fun to ask these questions and kind of understand more of how it works under the hood. So I wanted to, and this is actually we're kind of starting to wrap up. I only have 4 or 5 more, but this is my favorite kind of part. We saved for the end some future outlook stuff. And I love talking about that. So I wanted to kick it off with just, asking you sort of what do you see as the biggest opportunities for digital engineering in the aerospace industry over the next, call it a decade or so?
Yeah, I think the largest opportunity that we have within digital engineering is reducing the amount of actual test time with the units. So if you think about from a cost and from a timeline perspective, the more that we can test and not only test, but reliably test within that digital environment versus the actual hardware that's produced, the better the product's going to be. And as you start to refine that model and that digital twin is truly representative of what is fielded, you're going to have safer, more efficient machines. And those are going to be able to continue to evolve at a faster rate. So to me and to a lot of my team members, that's what we're most excited about, is how do we shorten the cycle time and improve continuously versus just when you're deploying the product, it's cycling back through and those continuous updates, improvement, and understanding the modeled versus the as built and closing the gap between the two.
Interesting. And how do you, this is maybe definitely a more leadership focused question, but interested in how you think kind of leadership in engineering will evolve as, we continue to become more and more distributed and diverse, as we've covered. Just interested, as that becomes more of the norm than the exception, just how that changes leadership in engineering.
That's a great question. That's actually something roughly mid-career that I'm thinking through, and how do I continue to improve myself? And I think a piece of it, and even within the digital engineering realm, I'm not the smartest person in the room. And recognizing that as a leader, your biggest asset is recognizing who on your team that you can trust and go to and can help coach and lead is paramount, right? So it's a little bit of a different model than perhaps we're used to seeing in leadership, where if you're at the top of the pyramid, what you say goes. It's recognizing you may be at the top because you have strong leadership attributes, but technically there might be people who have 5 years experience that have vastly more technical knowledge in that particular domain, because it's software, it's tools, it's products that we've had to learn as professionals 20 years into our career versus something that, students are coding Python now in grade school. It's just a different environment, and being able to recognize as a leader to kind of swallow a little bit of that pride, and that as a leader, your biggest attribute is your team.
Absolutely. That makes sense. What, again, my favorite part of the segment, and perhaps my favorite question is, as I'm, excited to learn more about this, what kind of emerging technologies are you seeing now that you're sort of most excited about in terms of kind of transforming, aerospace development in general?
Yeah, so something that as an organization we've been experimenting with, if you will, is AI, and how does that leverage how we develop our products, right? Whatever that may be, whether it's an engine or an airframe or a missile or whatever it needs to be, especially within the defense and aerospace domain. And, as you can imagine, it's an area that, especially on the military side of things, people are a little nervous about. What does this really mean? How do we know that it's right? And so I think that is our biggest opportunity and simultaneously our biggest threat, right? Is not leaning so heavily on this ever improving tool that we lose the ability for critical thought, right? And that critical thinking is what keeps us unique as humans. And if we lose that, then using that AI starts to be our downfall, right? So even though things can process faster and maybe it gives a better result than the human can, go through data significantly faster, especially when you think about cloud computing, than we could just as humans traditionally. But we have to be able to critically think and do that fact check, and maintaining that technical prowess as the engineering community. I think that's part of our both biggest challenge and biggest opportunity.
100%. And that makes sense, right? And being an emerging tech and being, just the nature of AI. But that's good to hear, right? That we're exploring it, we're looking into it, but right, a little skeptical or at least a little measured in the right approach to it, I think makes a lot of sense. And I wanted to just close out, I believe, my last question of this interview, kind of going a little full circle. I just wanted to see, what advice you'd have for young women out there considering a career in engineering and specifically engineering leadership.
So I would suggest to reach out to someone. So especially with platforms we've got these days, LinkedIn and so forth, there are females in engineering around the world. Find someone that you admire, look up to, has a role either in an organization or type of field that you're interested in, and reach out. When folks reach out to me and say, hey, I'm thinking about maybe doing engineering, or I'm a freshman and interested about going this, 100%. I love to help coach and support. And quite honestly, I have yet to come across another female in engineering that has not been more than willing to bend over backwards and say, how can I help you? What do you need to know? I'd love to sit down for a coffee or a lunch or a breakfast and better understand you and what are your fears? What are you concerned about? I actually do a mentorship at one of the schools that I went to as well. And being able to give back, I don't think is a unique thing to me, right? Women in engineering recognize that we are a minority. And the only way to kind of bring us up and kind of level that playing field is to get more women in engineering. And that's through information and coaching and them seeing someone that looks like them, right? It's a lot easier to identify with a career path or a role or a company when you look at it and say, oh, well, there's someone else who's gone through the challenges that I might go through. I can look up to them as a mentor and they can help me along the way.
Absolutely. Great advice. And obviously I can't speak to a woman in engineering, but I can tell you one of the great lessons that sort of unlocked for me a little later on was that cold emailing works, that so many folks out there do want to help. And you're a little hesitant. You're a little scared because they're a stranger. You feel like you're bothering them. Dropping someone a short message or a short email or something, it works more times than I would expect it to. And so if there's someone that you want to pick their brain, you look up to them, admire them, they're in your field or a field you want to be in, it does not hurt to reach out and see what happens. But yeah, I think that is an awesome point to end on for your advice there. And yeah, Amanda, thank you so much for joining. Like I said, it was an honor for me to get to, learn a little bit more about an industry I don't know a ton about and dig in there. So thank you so much for joining today.
No, thank you for having me. It was great.
What an inspiring conversation with Amanda about leadership, transformation, and staying grounded in your values while working on the future of aerospace. What stood out to me most was Amanda's approach to balancing innovation with rigor. In an industry where safety is non-negotiable, She helps teams explore new technologies like AI and digital engineering while maintaining the highest standards of reliability. Her emphasis on communication, culture, and critical thinking reminds us that transformation is much about people as it is about the tools. I also loved hearing how Amanda builds connection and trust with her teams, from leveraging consent communication cadences to championing inclusion across borders. Her advice for aspiring women in engineering: reach out, ask questions, find someone who's walked the path, is something we can all learn from, no matter where we are in our careers. Thank you, Amanda, for sharing your journey and your leadership philosophy. And thank you to our listeners for being part of this conversation. It's stories like these that remind us why we keep moving forward. Join us next time for more insightful conversations with tech leaders who inspire us to grow, lead, and innovate. Find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube Music. And don't forget to share this episode if it resonated with you. Until next time.